So it's uh it's things are popping up all over the place. I've
Well,
never
you
I've never done anything exactly like this, like where sort of I've done the record version of this of kind of different people singing each song
here
and
it is, right?
uh-huh.
Yeah,
And
excellent.
so this is here it is, but folded out to include the National Symphony Orchestra. So it's a it's a big palette, you know.
Right, but
But
and I know we're jumping it right into it, but you have worked with orchestras before. You have
I have, yeah, but
wow.
not in this kind of particular way, of having different singers, different artists singing each song, and it's kind of a combination of that, and then having uh, a rhythm section of sort of my favorite, the sort of players from the jazz area of things, who are very much at the kind of top of that that area. They're sort of beyond genre, but they're uh, this incredible band, and it's background singers, and it's a big, doing it in a live setting is a whole other deal, I've discovered.
Before we jump into Walter Becker Circus Money, if I could ask, you talked about getting the band together in the rhythm section. Who are you using in terms of your drummer? I assume, are you hiring a bass player?
Kendrick Scott
Okay.
is playing drums, who's fantastic. I'm sure you might know of him. He's you know uh, makes his own records on Blue Note, and he's just a brilliant drummer and musician. Bill Frisell is playing guitar.
Wow.
Um, Emmanuel Wilkins is playing alto sax, and he's a young guy who is now making his second or third record on Blue Note, and just brilliant. And I'm not playing. I chose in the end not to play bass because I've got Scott Colley playing, who played on Here It Is, and uh, in the end, I just thought that I wanted to kind of do a two bass thing that would be interesting as far as some of the things we could do, but in the end I decided to free myself up to be able to make sure that everything's working,
Great.
rather than being anchored in a seat, and trying to do what I needed to do to make that concept work. So and Greg Lease is playing pedal steel, amazing,
Yes.
wonderful player. And on some things, Derek Trucks, because Derek is uh, Derek Trucks and Susan Tedeschi are one of the artists, as a as a unit, that are on the program. And so Derek's very generously offered to play on some things that he wasn't with her on. So
Wow.
oh, and a great, incredible pianist named composer named Paul Cornish, who's a young guy who came through the Hancock Institute and now is playing with Joshua Redman and actually doing his own tour coming up, and just made a record himself that's just gorgeous. He hasn't found a home for it quite yet, but um so yeah, and Vince Mendoza, of course, who I'm working with on the
Mhm.
orchestral end of things,
Fantastic. Well, thank you for that, and I certainly appreciate your time.
Yeah. Well. I've known. Well, I've seen your posts for quite some times, for quite some time, and of course, uh, uh, Circus Money is my what would you call it? My sort of under recognized uh, child,
Well, I mean, Larry, I didn't introduce you when I started the recording. And if I did introduce you, it would take all the time we have available. You have produced so many great albums or played on so many great albums that I love. And I've seen you live, I think twice, but I may have met you when I was a kid in Baltimore when my dad, Henry Frazier Sr., was working with Left Bank Jazz Society,
Oh
and
yeah,
he was
yeah.
bringing Freddie Hubbard from the airport. And I didn't see Freddie perform at the famous ballroom in Baltimore because I think I went home
Ah,
late, but I know
I
my
remember. I remember the famous ballroom.
Mhm.
I remember. I had a T-shirt that they because they would give you a T-shirt when you'd play there. Good T-shirt. But I remember. I very clearly remember playing there.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah,
my
man.
dad just loved Freddie Hubbard, and I was glad that I got to. I met him only once, and I'm glad I got to experience that. So thank you for that. And then, of course, I saw you live in I think the late 90s, early 2000s. And my podcast is really talking about some of my favorite albums. And I started with the first season with two albums that you were heavily involved in, one being Chalk Mark in a Rainstorm, which I absolutely love, and the
Mhm.
second one being Walter Becker's Circus Money, which um, I love both Walter Becker solo albums, but Circus Money especially I thought was extremely well done, and the writing was extremely rich. And you participated in co-writing every song except for one on that album. Could you tell me how you got involved with Walter in that album?
Yeah, I mean, uh, uh, we became friends. We first met at the Grammys, and I'm trying to think which year it was. 2000. It could have been 2000. Where the one where they won, I think, album of the year
Probably
for Two Against
2001.
Nature, and which was, you know, they were up against. They were the long shot. They were up against all these very big records sales wise, and I was so happy, that they won because I was a huge fan, and so anyhow we met there and just liked each other. I mean, we were kind of mutual fans, uh, though, you know, I mean, uh, you know, he was for so many years, since I was a kid, I was a Steely Dan fan, and knew his solo record. and so we just became good friends, and that sort of developed. And at a certain point, he just asked me out of the blue, do you want to work together and write a record? I want to write a record as an artist, and you want to write it with me, and we both kind of said, well, what do two bass players do, you know, but got to write some songs, and uh, and I was flattered and absolutely, I just thought, oh, this sounds like um, it would be a great experience for me, and something that I could learn a great deal from.
Mhm.
And so we decided to make a start, and we got together. We wrote the record between LA and New York, a little bit in on Maui, but sort of jags. Uh, we had these writing jags, and we'd get a certain amount of musical fragments
Mhm.
and pieces that we would start working on, and then we'd start working on lyrics for them, and it was just fantastic. It was great fun. We we laughed a whole lot. We both had come out of uh, uh, we both had come out of difficult and ill-fated relationships with women, and so we had a lot of common subject matter, a lot of subject matter in common to draw from, and and a kindred aesthetic, a kindred sense of humor. I mean, we spent a whole lot of time laughing together while we were working, and for me, it was like, playing tennis with John McEnroe or something. I mean, he was such a good writer, uh, and so facile, in the lyric realm of things. Um, uh, that I just had to sort of hang on, and and well, from my perspective, really learn everything that I could from him, because he was always two steps ahead of me.
Well, if I could ask though, you have co-written with a number of fantastic writers. Uh,
Um,
did your approach with Walter Becker differ than, say, with Madame Perot or Sean Colvin or Joni Mitchell?
yeah, each situation is always different for me. I mean, with Walter, as I was saying, it was, uh, I think, the process of taking experience and stories, uh, from our lives, and dialogue and humorous exchanges, and taking those pieces and culling them into song form, uh, was something he was so good at and so quick with. Uh, you know, it was really was um, a learning experience to, you know, I mean, we'd be talking through, you know, talking about something, you know, just randomly, and he would say that, let's write it down, okay, you know, so we would get titles. We had a list of titles, song titles, and and then as we would sit and, you know, drink wine um uh and just sit and talk about things, laugh, and out of our dialogues, uh lines would kind of pop out, you know, and we, you know, we both would say, you know, we would kind of trade off, like, ooh, like, what about that? And then the other, you, maybe one of us would say that, and then the other would take the line that the other of us had picked out, and make a refinement of it.
Mhm.
Uh, and then that would lead us on to, oh, you know, like, let's have the next line resolve that in this way or that way. And so it was that kind of process. Whereas with, you know, I mean, my job changes with every artist that I work with, because it really is filling in uh, the spots, the areas where either they need help, or where I can offer additional kind of stimulus, you know, and you know, for instance, with Joni, it usually emanated from songs that we wrote together, usually emanated from me experimenting with a piece of music and her saying, oh, give me that one, you know, and 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 then she would, you know, she would basically write a lyric, and I would kind of help her troubleshoot,
Mhm.
uh and, you know, I kind of would, in the editorial process, I might say, well, this line seems like it could be refined, you know, like, what do you think, you know, but she really did, um you know, 95% of the heavy lifting, and editorial work on the lyric end of things. She and you know, she would just pick out pieces of music that I was working on. In fact, there's one great story with Chalkmark in a Rainstorm, where I was over in England, and I was I was writing, I was doing some writing in after hours. You know, we'd finish in the studio, and I'd stay and kind of work on sketches of some different things that I had ideas for. And when she, at a certain point, Robert Plant was looking for songs and trying to figure out what his next solo project was going to be like, and uh, Mike Shipley and I talked to him about possibly working together. And I thought, well, what the hell, you know, I'm going to send a few of these things over for him to see what he thinks of them, you know. And being a huge Led Zeppelin fan, um, it was felt very cheeky of me to think that he might be interested in in doing writing together. And to my surprise, he said, "Okay, no, okay, I I want those." Uh, I think it was 3 songs, 3 tracks, um, that were, you know, that were had no words, had no. I had I had some kind of ideas melodically,
Mhm.
and so I was overjoyed. And when Joanie came over to England subsequently, I played her these demos, and she said, "I want those." And I said, "Well, I can't give them to you because what Robert Plant already said he wanted them, you know." And she said, "Nah, I I want you're going to give them to me." And so I had to go back to Robert and say, "Well, you know, I'm embarrassed to have to do this, but I have to pull my songs, you know,
Mhm.
or pull my these these demos." And he was very kind about it. He said, "Well, if it was anyone else, I'd be angry." Um, but yeah, but so those songs became reappeared, or they appeared on Chalk Mark and the Rainstone.
And you were in England because you were working on Peter Gabriel's So album? Was that the
No,
time?
I was in England working mainly on a record, a solo record for the bass player
Ben
and
Orr.
singer Ben Orr.
Right,
Yeah,
right, right, right.
that's what brought me over there. And but during my time working with Ben, then I got a call to come in and play on some of Peter's album, and which was fantastic to do. And then Joni came over, and we had finished, or Peter's record was finished by this time, and he very generously offered his studio for us to uh, start working on what became Chalk Mark and a Rainstorm in his studio.
Right,
And
in Bath, England.
yeah,
Wonderful.
which at that time was the studio he had was kind of a garage. It was nothing like uh, Real World is today.
Mhm. So if I could ask, when Walter and you first got together, was the intent that you would also produce it since he was a producer as well? Did you have that discussion about how that would work?
He asked me to produce it, and uh, you know, I said kind of the same thing that you're saying. I said, "Are you sure you want to do it like that?" You know, and he said, "Yeah, you produce it, and we'll write it together." And then he wanted me to play bass on it, actually. And I said, "No, no, you got to play bass on it. You're a highly underrated bass player. People need to know more about your bass playing."
Mhm.
And so I kind of insisted that he play bass on most of it. I ended up playing on one thing,
Right.
but 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 uh but yeah, no, he kind of had it in his head, um, the way that he wanted to do it, and he wanted to try uh, having me having me produce it. You know.
Mhm. And with regard to the players, I mean, a lot of the names are familiar to Steely Dan fans.
right?
Keith Carlock on drums, Dean Parks, who has co-written with Walter before, was on his first solo album. John
Who I
Harris.
had known forever too, and played with and used on records that I made for years.
The some of the other players that I'm not as familiar with, like Larry Golden, and keyboardist, and then who's
That
with
came from
Dan
me.
now.
I had worked with Larry a lot, you know.
Hmm. Who else did you bring in?
From my side, Goldings,
Henry Hayes out of New York, right?
Henry Hayes, Henry Hay, I believe was my idea because he's Jerry Hayes' cousin, and
Mhm.
Jerry Hay I had worked with a lot because as a brass arranger, he was just aside from being a great trumpet player. When he stopped, he was also a great brass arranger and worked a lot in L.A. doing that. Worked a lot with Quincy Jones,
Mhm.
and so I had worked with him um, in that capacity a lot. I'm sorry, yeah, that's Jerry Hay, but Henry Hay, Henry Hay, I knew about through Jerry.
Okay.
Uh, uh, I'm just trying to think who else I might have brought into the situation, um, musician wise. Some background singers was a mixture of people who Walter had worked with Steely Dan. And I brought Kate Markowitz in, who
James
had
Taylor.
had sung with James Taylor. She was a dear friend, and I knew her both, you know, from working on records in LA and from playing with James a little bit. And she's has a great blender kind of voice. And so
Mhm.
she 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 really was a was an asset. And I think maybe one or two, we worked with different combinations of backing vocalists. And so that was kind of a mixture of different people. Uh,
And there was some of the Steely Dan like standards like Carolyn Linhart,
right, sure,
um, I think Cindy Mizell may have sang on a song or two.
yeah,
Catherine Russell. Your wife sang on one of the songs, I believe.
that's right. She sang actually with Kate Markowitz on
Oh,
one
okay.
thing that we did out here in LA. And that was a very unusual kind of um selfish gene, I think. That it was a very unusual and kind of somewhat demanding technical song for them to sing background on. And they did so they sang together, and that worked. That was a really good combination between the two of them. Yeah.
So if I could talk a little bit about some of the songs, you referenced Selfish Gene, which is one of my favorites. But I'm going to start with another song, which I think, especially for background vocalists, must have been extremely difficult. And it's probably one of my favorite Walter Becker songs, which is Downtown Canon. Can you tell me a little bit about that song?
Yeah, I mean, that was a song that we started in New York, and I don't know how much of it finished in New York, the writing of it, but uh, it had to do with uh, sort of. I think the impetus to some degree came from his breakup of his uh, relationship, which he ended up going back uh, with the woman that he had broken up with, but uh, the lyrical impetus of it, to a large degree, came from talking about um, his breakup and oh, laughing about what happens when you split up with someone, and you have to divide up the stuff that you have together, and uh uh
I mean, it's pretty direct. It's pretty
yeah,
obvious
yeah,
what it's.
it's the it's the archetypal breakup story.
Mhm. And then
And
musically, look, we've referenced the backing vocals. That section could have been a tenor solo. It could have been a baritone solo. It could have been a piano solo. But you
yeah,
have that backing vocal part there, which is simply brilliant.
yeah, we couldn't figure out what to do with that section, and so we uh one day we were in the studio, and he said, you know what, let me just go out and sketch something. And so he went out into the studio and sang that line,
Mhm.
um, and then subsequently we had the background singers uh, sing it unison, you know. But we were just searching for different things to do, to different ways to deal with uh, uh, you know di- uh, different ways to deal with things musically that neither of us had done before. And
Mhm.
uh and that was one of them.
It's
Just
brilliant.
this idea of kind of just a scat kind of uh line instead of a solo.
Right. And it seems to me, and I know there are probably hundreds and hundreds of Walter Becker recordings which haven't been released from Steely Dan and from his solo career, but your approach with his vocals on this album really suits his talents very well. It seems totally different than what he did with Donald Fagen on the first solo album, or even the Steely Dan album, Two Against Nature, or Everything Must Go. How challenging was it to produce the vocal part from Walter?
It wasn't, it really wasn't. He knew what he could do vocally, and he knew uh you know his limitations vocally, and also what would be most effective, that he could actually do.
Mhm.
And uh and so it really was more just me uh kind of saying, "Oh, let's do one more pass," and maybe I might have said what if you approach this section a little quieter, or uh, uh, you know, de-emphasize this phrase or something, some little detail, but he would do like 4 or 5 passes, then we would comp it together.
Okay.
And but he knew his limitations, and kind of laughed about them, like, so it wasn't any kind of serious uh, process, really. It was more that, he'd do a group of passes, and then we'd sit with a uh, pen and pad and make notes, and then compare notes and say, oh, actually that line on the third pass was pretty good. Let's listen to that,
Hmm.
and we'd comp it together.
Interesting. So one thing you talked about when we started was your desire for him to play bass in every song, and I think he played bass in every one but the title track. Did
Hmm.
you have the same approach with regard to his guitar playing? Because I think he played the solos in every song except for Upside Looking Down that Dean Parks played.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, he wanted to play the solos, and um and that, I think, emanated from, uh I mean, he always belittled himself as a guitar player. He said, "Well, I'll play my little, my blues licks, and um, but he, at the same time, wanted to wanted to play more guitar. It was fun for him. He collected guitars. He had hundreds of guitars, literally. I mean,
Oh,
practically. He and he loved, he liked playing guitar. And I think that playing guitar on Steely Dan records uh was not a pleasant process for him, because he had to uh, be um, produced by Donald uh, in doing that, and he again, he knew his limitations and didn't take himself super seriously as a great guitar player. Um, so uh, you know, so he'd take some shot. Usually, if there was a solo spot that we thought was going to be a guitar solo, he might take some shots at it, and we'd do maybe, a number of passes, and then uh, go through and listen to them together, pick out what we felt worked. If something did, if we didn't get anything, then maybe he would do some more. Or, in some cases, like Upside Looking Down, we just, we knew that we needed to sort of have someone who had the kind of um, lyrical quality to their playing that Dean does, or is capable of doing. Dean's capable of doing pretty much anything, but he can, you know he can access that kind of lyricism that was needed on that song, and
yeah,
it
very
wasn't.
melodic part.
Yeah, so and he did it. I think he did maybe 4 or 5 passes or something, and then at a certain point we felt like, you know we both kind of gave him guidance. It wasn't the easiest song to find what worked, like he we just had to kind of nudge him this way and that way and say, well, what if you start out with something that's more spare in nature, and
Mhm.
just kind of gradually, we might have even punched some things together, I don't know.
Yeah, it
uh,
works really well.
yeah, he plays a beautiful solo on that.
And all the
He's
solos are
a
beautiful.
great guitarist.
He is. All the solos on the album are beautiful. And some of them are a little unusual. You bring in Chris Potter for a few solos on
Yeah,
tenor, then Roger Rosenberg on
baritone.
baritone, but he also played clarinet on one song on Three Picture Deal. I think it was clarinet, which,
Oh, bass clarinet, I
yeah,
think.
yep, bass clarinet.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I mean, three picture deal. The using a baritone sax or bass clarinet. That was Walter. He really liked Roger's playing and sensibility, and what was interested in having baritone sax as a color, a solo color on the record, and I just went along with it. It wasn't something that was a natural choice for me. But it had added a certain humorous kind of quality to things when he came in on as a soloist, and he was great and exceptional player. And Walter wanted to. I think Walter might have even produced a record of his.
He did. Yeah.
Yeah, and so he wanted to give him a voice on the record, and Potter just is an amazing,
Wow.
you know stellar musician and player, and so we both were excited about the idea of him playing on some things.
And it's
And
just great to, I'm sorry, go ahead, Larry.
yeah, and he didn't disappoint. He came in and just you know again, we probably did maybe 3 4 passes, and he would do something. Maybe we might combine 2 passes together, but he's just brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the soloists on the album are all great. Walter's playing, the bass playing, is absolutely stellar. And then the lead guitarists are great as well. And then, of
Mm.
course, you have Carlock, who's Keith Carlock. Um, is there anything else? We've been going about 45 minutes. I have to be respectful of your time. Is there anything else that you want to talk about with regard to the album?
Oh, no, only that for me, working with Walter was just like working. I mean, I've been incredibly fortunate in in my job that I do, which is a strange job. It's a amorphous job to to be a producer, because it changes with every record you make. It changes, your role changes, what you should bring to the thing changes. um I just learned an immense amount from working with him. I mean, he was a dear. I mean, we were all already just, you know, great friends, and we loved spending time together, and always spent a lot of time laughing and sharing our passion for books and records and different things, and so it, like all the records that I've done with Joanie, and I'm for me it's a learning process, as well as um, it's always a learning process, and but certainly a learning process when I'm working with people who are as incredibly talented and as Walter was. I mean, on the lyric end of things, I just don't. One thing I would say is that I don't think he got enough credit as uh, as a songwriter and as a lyricist, um, because because in regard to the Steely Dan records, Donald was always more visible, and Walter was just like, he was just brilliant. I mean, he was an incredibly smart guy, and a great writer, great songwriter, and we ended up, I mean, we overwrote for the record. There's other songs that we ended up, sort of bagging at one stage or another, just because for one reason or another we just felt like, okay, we've got enough things, so it was that, only that's what I would add, is that overall the record, I'm incredibly proud of it. It doesn't, I don't, I think it didn't get as much attention as it could have, because people are so used to hearing um, things with his name on them with Donald's voice,
Right.
and so him being a singer was just something that people had to, you know, I think a lot of people who listened to the record, they had to kind of get past their uh, that element of hearing him as a singer, which he also was a great singer, in the same way that Leonard Cohen was a great singer, even though you know uh, you know he would also uh, criticize his own ability to sing, and he had limitations, of course, but 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 uh, but both of them knew how to use what they had to great effect, to me.
Well, I mean, part of a big chunk of that is how you frame this album, how you made Circus Money. It's a brilliant, brilliant record. It is my favorite Becker album. It's probably my favorite album that either one of them did, Becker or Fagan did solo work. But before I let you go, I have to point out some other great albums that you've been involved, which I've fallen in love with. We started with Chalk Mark and the Rainstorm, obviously. Um, David Bearwald's Bedtime Stories. Oh my God, what a fantastic album. And I absolutely love it. J.D. Souther's Tenderness, which came out a few years ago.
Yeah,
Souther's probably his best work, period. He produced that.
he's on this show that at the Kennedy Center.
What a wonderful, I got to meet him a few times. Wonderful singer, songwriter, lyricist.
Yeah.
by Sean Colvin. Absolutely love that album. And the new
Thank you.
Bossa Nova by your wife. Oh,
Oh, thank you.
fantastic. So and we just talked, you talked about Here It Is and what you're doing in New York. Um, I really appreciate your time. I know you're a very busy man, but thank you for the insight about this album and the music. I really appreciate it.
Oh, great. Well, it's been a pleasure.
All right. Well, Larry, you take care of yourself.